Hello and welcome to Maximum Bjork, the first talking book about the artist. It was written and researched by Ben Graham, music is by Amanda Thompson, and it is read by Nancy McLean. You can check out our full catalogue on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk.
I never had any intention of being taken seriously, really. I think because in Iceland, I always did my own stuff, and the Sugarcubes, most people think that was the only thing I've done, which is fair enough, because that's the only thing foreigners know, and I forgive them for their ignorance. In Iceland, I did all these other things, you see, and most of them I ran myself, because I was very independent from early age, and the bands I started my first band when I was 12, and the whole process of getting a rehearsal studio, getting equipment, being roadies, going to the press, putting up the posters was very natural for me.
When she was 17, Bjork Gudmundsdóttir read a book that was to change the way she looked at life forever. Entitled The Story of the Eye, it was an erotic tale of two young people exploring sex for the first time. But it was the moral message contained in the story that inspired Bjork. Always do what you want to do, even if it means going against or even hurting someone else, someone you care about. Always follow your own path, your own intuition, because in the end, it's your life. And you're the one who's going to have to live with your decisions, the only one who can take responsibility for your actions. Bjork has lived this way ever since, abandoning conventional morality, rules and expectations in favour of trusting her own instincts. Also, at the age of 17, she had a tattoo on her shoulder, the Viking-inspired compass, a symbol of the infinite number of possibilities open to her in the world and the numerous directions her life could take. At the time, she was singing in an Icelandic punk band, having already been a child star and musical prodigy. Soon she would taste international success with the Sugarcubes, and then go even further with a solo career that has always pushed at the boundaries. Never content to do just one thing and never afraid of change, Bjork has embraced the wide variety of possibilities in the world around her, always seeking out diverse influences, new inspirations. From her early days in Reykjavik, listening to her grandmother's jazz collection and her mother's rock and roll, to the classical music and the songs, sagas and poetry of Iceland she was exposed to at school, then on to punk rock and surrealism, to electronica and ethnic sounds she heard in London. All have been sucked in and transformed by her singular vision. Bjork is an artist determined to go her own way, yet with an insatiable need for collaboration. A person who loves solitude and domesticity, yet craves excitement and change. A romantic searching for true love, who thrives on experience for its own sake, and a techno-futurist harking back to the swing and jazz standards of a bygone age. But all these paradoxes are what make her unique, along with her endless ability to be inspired, to combine sounds and images and make up something new and wonderful, something that is truly her own.
My grandmother told me on Christmas about two different types of birds who are birds that always have the same nest all their lives, like swans, and they always have the same partners all life. And there are birds that travel all the time and they always have different partners all the time.
Bjork Gudmundsdóttir was born in Reykjavik, the capital city of Iceland, on the 21st of November 1965. Her father, a trade union leader, was called Gudmundur Gunnarsson, and Dóttir literally just means daughter, so her name means Gudmund's daughter. However, Bjork's parents divorced soon after she was born, as her mother, Hilda Rún Hauksdóttir, could not cope with the role of housewife that had been forced on her after her marriage and the birth of a child. Hilda left Gudmundur, taking the infant Bjork with her, and remarried a professional musician, a guitarist whose band Pops covered the hits of Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton, as well as using their own similar material. She was brought up in a liberal, artistic collective household although she's always quick to stress that it was not the stereotypical hippie commune of legend. What it was 8 people all renting rooms in the same flat, playing and listening to music and taking care of each other's children. In the prevailing style of the day, though, they cooked and ate healthy food together and had a preference for long hair and semi-psychedelic fashion. Recreational drug use was tolerated and individual freedom was encouraged. Bjork was allowed to run around and do what she wanted. Indeed, a favourite pastime of hers as a child was to run down the middle of the road with her eyes closed. One time she collided with a lamppost and still bears a small scar. Quickly she learned to take responsibility for her own life. At a very young age, she found herself having to cook her own meals and make sure the electric bills were paid, things her laid-back parents were not particularly adept at keeping up with. On the plus side, there was always music around, and Bjork remembers permanent cues next to the record player at home. As soon as one person finished playing something, somebody else would put another record on. She was exposed to a wide range of musical styles as a child, in an atmosphere where music was discussed seriously and passionately among people who also played instruments themselves. Apparently, at the age of 1, Bjork got goose pimples when she heard a beautiful melody and started to sing and write her own songs almost before she could walk and talk. Of course, her creativity was encouraged, and the child Bjork was in many cases treated like a little adult, amongst adults who often liked to behave as though they were children. Her opinions were listened to and taken seriously. She was involved in conversations on an equal level, and the different individuals in the household would explain to her the themes behind the record they were playing or the book they were reading. She was allowed to stay up as late as she wanted, wear whatever clothes she liked, and pursue her own interests. The first band she fell in love with were the pioneering synth duo Sparks. But this interest was also an early form of rebellion. Her parents, who surrounded her with classic guitar music and jazz, couldn't understand her affection for this willfully artificial, ironic pop group who played tinny keyboards and sang in such a vulgar and affected manner. This bohemian freedom was only one side of Bjork's childhood, however, as from the age of 5 until she was 14, she attended Reykjavik Musical College, rigorously studying the flute and the piano. Here, the jazz and rock she heard at home were augmented by a strict grounding in classical music, a form that she enthusiastically responded to, embracing its discipline, its difficulties, its complexities, and its possibilities. Ironically, Bjork's communal, liberal upbringing instilled in her a yearning for order and for rules, form and structure. While naturally anarchic and taking freedom for granted, she also saw the downside of a total laissez-faire attitude from an early age, which gave her a degree of contempt for people who were all talk and no action. She craved certainties rather than vagueness. She wanted to get things done and done properly. In short, she had been given not only the confidence and desire to express herself, but also the ambition to succeed. When Bjork was 10, all the children's parents were invited to her school to attend a concert where each of the kids would sing a song or recite a poem. She sang the Icelandic #1 hit of that year, 1976, I Love to Love. In attendance, as well as parents, were a crew from Reykjavik radio station who recorded Bjork singing and played the tape on air. The recording was heard by a producer from the Folkin record company. He immediately phoned the station and through them contacted Bjork to ask her if she would consider making an album. With her parents' encouragement, she agreed, and the LP, Bjork, was released in Iceland in 1977 with great success. Her first record came in a garish psychedelic sleeve, mixing Indian ethnic style with day-glow kitsch, and featuring an 11-year-old Bjork sitting staring out from the middle of a veritable temple of hippie tat, long-haired and innocent. The record itself consisted mostly of pop versions of old Icelandic nursery rhymes and folk songs, alongside versions of the Beatles' song The Fool on the Hill and Stevie Wonder's Your Kiss is Sweet, sung in Icelandic. Her stepfather wrote one song, and the record also contained one Bjork original, an instrumental track named Jóhann Kjærvöll, dedicated to the Icelandic painter of the same name. Bjork, the album, sold 6,000 copies, making Bjork, the singer, a domestic child star. Suddenly, lots of other children wanted to play with her, but she soon realised that it was the girl on the album cover they wanted to be with, not her. Meanwhile, All her old school friends shunned her now that she was famous, and her only real friends seemed to be the musicians 3 times her age, all of whom were encouraging her to make a second album. Disillusioned and unnerved by her first brush with fame, Bjork resisted. She still loved music, but if she was going to carry on making it, she would do it her way.
I think what happens when you have a child that young is the child becomes more like a passionate rather than a child. I mean, obviously still you cannot take care of them and feed them and dress them and everything, but still it's more like a companion almost.
After becoming famous for a record that barely had anything to do with her, Bjork felt an enormous sense of guilt. The record that bore her name was not really her own work. It was a manufactured product, and she had just been another ingredient used by the machine. If this was mainstream success, she wanted none of it. At the same time, she looked at her parents and their hippie friends and saw them wasting their talents, dribbling their musical abilities away on endless noodling jam sessions, unable to produce a decent, concise, interesting song at the end of it. What was the point of freedom if you just sat around and did nothing, disappearing into a self-indulgent haze? Bjork was coming into her teens, for the first time seriously questioning the world around her. As luck would have it, a musical movement was coming along made up of disparate individuals who all felt much the same way, who wanted to kick over the old order and start again. In 1979, punk hit Iceland. Having fallen in love with the hardcore British punk band Discharge, Bjork formed her first group, Exodus, at the age of 13. She then played drums with a militant feminist outfit called Spit and Snot, who wrote songs about hating men, possibly inspired by the casual male chauvinism, if not outright misogyny, that she witnessed every day in the supposedly right-on hippie scene. They soon split up, however, allegedly due to attitude problems, and Bjork then went on to sing in what became Iceland's most popular punk band, Tappi Tikaras. With a name that roughly translates as "Cork That Bitch's Arse," Tappi Tikaras recorded and released 2 albums, 1982's Stuck on the Mind and 1983's Miranda, before splitting up. With a gothy, melodic sound reminiscent of the early Cure, they attracted enough attention for Icelandic record company Gram Records to approach several of their members for an all-star Icelandic punk band they were putting together, Kukl. While the idea of a record company manufacturing a credible hardcore punk band by poaching their members from other existing punk groups seems bizarre, Kukl enjoyed relatively big success. Appearing together for the first time at a We Demand the Future concert in Reykjavik in 1983, they released their first single, Songl, in December of that year. Kukl's lead singer was Einar Örn Benediktsson, formerly of the band Perka Pilnik, and the lineup also included drummer Siggy Baldursson, previously in a group called Thea. Bjork had also sung with Thea, who had attracted the attention of Jazz Coleman and Youth, singer and bassist respectively, with the then successful band Killing Joke, who had turned up in Iceland in 1982 on some mysterious paranoid mission concerning occult forces and an impending world apocalypse. They ended up collaborating with Thea, gaining them some short-lived notoriety outside of their home country. Youth, of course, would go on to become one of the most respected dance music producers of the 90s, his career working with artists such as The Orb and Blue Pearl, oddly paralleling Bjork's own. The main achievement of Kukl, whose name means witchcraft, was to have their records released outside of Iceland, on Crass Records, the label set up and run by the legendary English narco-punk band of the same name. Formed in 1978 by Steve Ignorant and Penny Rambo, the group's fluid lineup lived together in an Epping commune. They were known as much for their fiercely DIY ethics, uncompromising political stance, lengthy diatribes and stark primitive artwork as for their music, which made no concessions to either tunes or melody. Their post-Falklands single, How Does It Feel? To Be the Mother of 1,000 Dead, was dedicated to Margaret Thatcher and topped the indie charts. while their label also released records by Kindred Spirits, The Poison Girls, Rudimentary Peni, Conflict and Flux of the Pink Indians. Kukul, however, had the distinction of being the only band on the label, apart from Crass themselves, to actually release more than one album. They also sounded nothing like either Crass or the bands they were associated with. Debut LP The Eye was a complex mixture of goth, punk, jazz and tribal rhythms, using layers of percussion, bells and even trumpets to create a sound that critics compared to Killing Joke, Susie and the Banshees and Einstürzende Neubauten. Despite still all having full-time jobs, Bjork worked in a fish factory and a Coca-Cola bottling plant. Kukul toured Europe in 1985, playing at Denmark's prestigious Roskilde Festival and releasing the live cassette Kukul à Paris on the French Flux Rebel label. Their second LP proper, 1986 Holidays in Europe, saw them moving in a more industrial direction, but that same year the band split up. Einar, however, recruited Bjork and drummer Ziggy to play in his new band, which he'd formed partly as a joke and partly to express a more light-hearted, quirky form of music than was suitable for Kukul. This new band was to be the Sugarcubes. Initially, Bjork thought that the Sugarcubes would last just a few months, and then they'd all go back to being in Kukul. They were as much an art project as a group, an offshoot of a nebulous art collective known as Bad Taste. Bad Taste had evolved out of the Reykjavik surrealist group that called itself Medusa, a many-headed bunch of poets and performers that would give readings when they threw raw meat at the audience while reciting their verse. Among the members of Medusa was the poet Thor Eldon, who would become Björk's first love, husband, and the father of her son, Sindri. Bjork had become involved with the Medusa group while singing with Tappi Tikaras when she'd been inspired by their energy, their confrontational attitude, and the sheer number of ideas flying around. She joined their loose artistic commune, sitting up all night with Einar and Thor, fueled by homebrew and cheap wine, discussing art, surrealism and philosophy. As the only girl present at these sessions, Bjork played the part of the little punk, with her long orange hair and shaved eyebrows, and their drunken arguments were often heated and antagonistic. Nevertheless, she found these discussions both stimulating and mind-expanding, adding yet another dimension to her creative education. Another member of Medusa was the poet, wit and dandy Sujon, who continues to collaborate with Bjork on her lyrics to this day. During her pregnancy, Bjork appeared on an Icelandic TV special on Kukul, wearing just a bra and skirt. She was heavily bulging, which caused streams of outraged letters and calls to flood in from viewers, while one elderly lady actually suffered a heart attack. Just like her own mother, she divorced the father of her child after the birth, bringing up Sindri on her own, although her and Thor remained close friends. They supposedly only had a child together because of the incentive of an Icelandic government grant designed to boost the population, which in turn allowed Thor to buy a pair of contact lenses. Whatever the reason for their union, their son Sindri was born on the 8th of June 1986, which was also the date given to the press as marking the official formation of the Sugarcubes.
I was 21 when the Sugarcubes started. We all knew they would just last for a little bit. We still run our label in Iceland called Bad Taste. And the main reason for that is to be a nest for both poets and painters, sculptors, whatever, bands who wouldn't probably even put out a poetry book and forget their poets for the rest of their lives if we wouldn't just push them a bit. And then when they start to be well off, we throw them out of the nest and they have to sort themselves out.
By the mid-80s, the punk scene in Iceland seemed to have run out of steam. It had not been, as it was in Britain and America, simply another musical fad, a new twist in an already existing genre. It had been literally the first time that local artists, writers and performers and musicians had been able to create anything of their own. As Bjork herself later said when she and her friends first began forming punk groups, There was no modern Icelandic music. It was up to them to create it. They had the blank canvas, the year zero, that the Sex Pistols and their ilk yearned for. Accordingly, when the initial burst of energy and aggression fizzled out, the musicians and artists involved could not return to existing forms, but were forced to seek out new ways of expressing the creativity and passion that had been unleashed. So it was that various members of the band Perker Pilnik, seminal art punk outfit B, and the Medusa Surrealist Collective, with its musical offshoot, Van Houten's Coco, combined to set up a production company that would encompass many different disciplines and styles, with an anarchic irreverence towards convention. Formed according to the universal truth that good taste and prudence are the bane of creativity, they called the company Bad Taste. Bad Taste's first release was a postcard commemorating the summit meeting held in Reykjavik in 1986 between US President Ronald Reagan and his Soviet counterpart Mikhail Gorbachev. To the company's surprise, the postcard was a bestseller, raising enough money for Bad Taste's hastily formed house band, the Sugarcubes, to record and release their debut single. Founder member Einar envisioned the Sugarcubes' sound as pop clichés distorted in a grotesque and tasteless way. The initial lineup included Einar, Bjork and Siggy from Kukul, Bragi Olafsson and Fredrik Erlingsson from Einar's old band Perker Pilnik, and Björk's by now ex-husband, the poet and guitarist Thor Eldon from the Medusa Collective, and Van Houten's Coco. Bad Taste, which at this time encompassed an art gallery, poetry bookshop, radio station and publishing house, also became a record company in order to release the Sugarcubes' first single, Amelie, in Iceland in November 1986. At this point, Einar was also studying at university in London and was in touch with the English music business contacts he'd made during Kukul's time on Crass Records. Among these was Derek Burkett, bass player from fellow anarchist punk rockers and Crass label mates, Flux of Pink Indians. Formed in Hertfordshire in 1980 by Derek and his brother Colin on vocals, alongside guitarist Kevin Hutter and drummer Martin Wilson, Flux of Pink Indians released their debut New Smell EP on Crass Records before setting up their own indie record company, Spiderleg. From this point on, however, the band became less and less active, while Derek Burkett became more involved in the business of running a record company. By the end of 1986, Flux were no more, and Derek Burkett had founded a new label, One Little Indian Records, in London. Einar convinced him that the Sugarcubes would make a fine addition to the company's roster, and accordingly the band re-recorded Amelie with English lyrics. With artwork and promotion all coordinated and overseen by Einar, the single Birthday was released in Britain at the beginning of 1987. With its quirky, haunting melody, its unorthodox musicianship and gentle, yet somehow vibrantly raw atmosphere, Birthday was quite unlike anything the British music press had heard before. Plaintive, yet mysterious, pagan and beguiling, its appeal was largely down to Björk's unearthly vocals, with their childlike lyrics and phrasing, as if recounting some ancient nursery rhyme about a strange old woman who collects horseflies and pinches them on a string. It was at once sweet and oddly disturbing, feeling slightly queasy and off-kilter, the sweetness of Björk's singing countered by Einar's harsh spoken vocals in the background. English music fans were also attracted by Björk's appearance, and the phrase pixie-like was used for the first time, but certainly not the last. Her open, unconventional beauty, her dress and mannerisms, and that uninhibited, sensual and powerful voice, rising breathily from a growl to an operatic scream, made her an immediate student pin-up, an object of fascination. Birthday shot to the top of the indie charts and many critics' end-of-year polls, including John Peel's Festive 50, as voted for by listeners of the popular BBC radio show. Compared by the press to the ethereal likes of the Cocteau Twins, the Sugarcubes were in fact made of harder stuff. Their 1988 debut album, Life's Too Good, included raucous, guitar-driven tracks like Motor Crash and Delicious Demon, alongside the claustrophobic, grindingly metallic Cold Sweat, and more reflective songs like Deus, in which God sports sideburns. Life's Too Good sold over 1 million copies, but left the band uncomfortable with their newfound star status. The Sugarcubes had been formed for a lark, as a group to play at parties, But suddenly they found themselves being endlessly interviewed and profiled by the press and TV, bombarded with questions about whether they really did eat puffins in Iceland. The Sugarcubes initially toured Britain as support to doomy industrial art terrorists, the Swans, but were soon headlining their own shows, including playing second on the bill to New Order at 1989's Reading Festival. Fredrik Erlingsson had quit before the end of 1987, leaving the band to concentrate on his writing, but the other members continued, partly as a way to pay off the debts accumulated during their years in Kukul. In 1989, the Sugarcubes released their second album, Here Today, Tomorrow, Next Week. Recorded virtually live in the studio, it had a raw, crude and more powerful sound than its predecessor, and, at least in Britain, was not as well received. Nevertheless, the band set out on a world tour in 1990 with new keyboard player Maggie Olmulfsdóttir, formerly of the Icelandic group Giant Lizard. The tour was successful but draining, and the band were unsure if they wanted to carry on. There was still a great demand for the Sugarcubes, but its members were exhausted. It was time to take a break and consider their future.
I am stupid, and I've said this very, very many times. I am stupid. I am an idiot. I am intelligent. I am a woman. I am a grandmother. I am 100 years old. I'm 80 years old.
Following their exhausting world tour, the Sugarcubes went home to Iceland to recuperate. In order to recharge their creative batteries, they began working on projects away from the global spotlight that was now focused on them. They briefly became a jazz big band, playing swing standards, which led to Bjork recording a solo LP in 1990 entitled Glinglo, singing 1950s jazz backed by a local bebop group, the trio Gudmundar Ingólfssonar. Only released in Iceland on Bad Taste, it was another example of Bjork's wayward instinct to follow her heart, rather than let commercial common sense dictate what she should do. At the same time, she was listening less to punk and indie guitar music and more to dance, techno and hip-hop. This, she believed, was the emerging sound of the 1990s, where exciting developments were starting to happen. These interests led her to collaborate with the Manchester techno pioneers 808 State on their XL album, singing on Q-Mart and the single Oops. The other members of the Sugarcubes were also pursuing outside interests. Einar was working with other Icelandic musicians. Thor was starting out as a producer. Maggie was pursuing her studies as a classical pianist, Bragi was writing poetry full-time, and Siggy had transformed himself into lounge singer Bogomil Font, the crooner from behind the Iron Curtain. Relationships in the band were becoming increasingly tangled too. Björk's ex-husband Thor had married Maggie, while Einar and Bragi had also married each other following Bragi's split from Siggy's wife's sister. Einar and Bragi's wedding in Denmark in 1989 was the first openly gay marriage in pop history. Unofficially, the Sugarcubes had split up, but they reunited in 1991 to record their third album, Stick Around for Joy, at Bearsville Studios in Woodstock, New York. Something of a late triumph, this was an LP of propulsive modernist funk, which spawned the hit single Hit. It was not enough to keep them together, however, and in 1992 they began their official farewell tour supporting U2, at the band's personal request, on the last leg of their mammoth Achtung Baby stadium tour. The Sugarcubes' last ever concert was at New York's Limelight Club in November 1992. Their final words on leaving the stage were, "Thank you, we were the Sugarcubes." That, it would seem, was that.